Yo, Marilyn, how we doing a book tag today?
Oh yeah, we're doing an autobiographical book tag. I get to talk about myself. Hey, is that thing on? Aloha and welcome back to my channel. I'm Marilyn, Maya, whatever you choose, the baby boomer booktuber, and this is Princessa Jasmine. Doesn't she look nice today? She had a bath. She wants to get away because I said her name. Today I'm going to do a somewhat autobiographical book tag, and this was created by Mark at Book Time with Elvis, and Elvis is his dog, and he was gracious enough to tag me for this because I think he knew that I would really love this tag because I write memoir. Let's start. Let's get at it because there's 15 questions and a little surprise. Number one, what was the number one best-selling book, fiction or nonfiction, on the day you were born? Okay, 100 years ago, just kidding. In 1950, the bestseller in the fiction and nonfiction was called The Cardinal by Henry Morton Robinson, about the life of a Roman Catholic priest. And I found out that it was made into a movie with with the director Otto Preminger. I never heard of it and I never read it. Number two, what are some books, series, or standalone that immediately spring to mind when you think of your childhood? That was a long time ago, as we know, but there was a comic book series that I really loved called Classics Junior, and I talked about it in another video, but I'm going to have it here, and that was the first episode. It was Jack and the Beanstalk, and what it was fairy tales. And also I liked Hans Christian Andersen, and I got this in Denmark at the Hans Christian Andersen's house. He has a real house, and well, he had a real house, and this is a collection of his poems, and including the Snow Queen that was messed up by Disney and all the others, Grimm fairy tales that were messed up by Disney. I say they were messed up because they were prettied up. Now, Grimm fairy tales, as well as Hans Christian Andersen, were pretty brutal. So that's what I was brought up on and what I liked. I also put down a really old book, published in 1885, before my time, called A Child's Garden of Verses by Robert Louis Stevenson. And I remember looking at the book and memorizing the words and the poems and the little verses. There was also another book that I'll put up there, and it was called Stone Soup. And it was a fable. It was reworked in the 1940s from either a German fable or it was a fable from many countries, different countries. Number three, school days are the best days of your life, apparently, but there you were forced to read some books you maybe wouldn't have chosen for yourself. Which did you enjoy? For me, school days were not the best of my life. I was bullied, I was shunned for some of those years, but I'll continue to answer the question. I read a book in school called Johnny Tremaine, and it was by Esther Forbes, published in 1943, about a boy in the Civil War, which I thought I wouldn't enjoy, but I really enjoyed it. I don't remember if it was the 5th grade but it was pretty elementary school. In high school, I read Giants in the Earth, A Saga of the Prairie by Ole Edvard Rolvang. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's the struggles of a Norwegian immigrant in the Dakota Territory in the 1870s. And this was published in 1927. And it was very exciting and sad, and it really gave you a sense of the history of what it was like to be a pioneer, actually. And I enjoyed it very much, and I remember that I cried at the end, so it must be sad. But I can't I tried to reread it, and I didn't get the same feeling out of it, so I don't know, maybe I'll try again. 4, were you independent or part of a pack at school? Did you join in the reading fads of the day or do your own thing? I struggled to belong. In my neighborhood or hood, we didn't really have a reading fad. I had, the only reading fad I had was with my cousin who recently passed away, and we were very close, and we read Gone with the Wind together when I was 12. But the only time that I belonged was when I was part of a gang. I was called Tiny. The gang's name was the Horsemen, and luckily I only joined for 3 months. I was sort of, you know, it was an invitation I couldn't refuse, let's put it that way. So yeah. 5, as you moved into your turbulent teens, can you remember your first experience encountering sex in a book? This is also part of my memoir, and my father collected, let's put it this way, girly magazines, to say it a nice way. And one day when I was looking around his closet, a box of it fell on my head. I don't remember how old I was, but that was my introduction, not so nice introduction to sex. Later on, I found The Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller and Lolita, but I'd be honest with you, I tried to read it and I was too young, I didn't understand it, so that was good. The book that I remember that I bought with my own money was called The Carpetbaggers by Harold Robbins, a trashy book by I heard a trashy person. He once said, what's the best thing someone can say to you? And he said, that I'm good in bed. And what's the worst thing that someone can say to you? And he said, that I'm bad in bed. He wasn't a nice person. And he wrote a lot of trashy bestsellers during that time. But I was 14 and I heard it was a sexy book, which it was. And now looking back and looking at Goodreads, I can tell that it's a horrible book. But I was 14. What are some of the, number 6, what are some of the first kinds of nonfiction you encountered? I guess it was when I was trying to belong to a group. I would read every book about how to be popular. So I guess those are nonfiction. And that is going to come up in more of these questions. So I'll just leave it as how-to books. 7, whose bookshelf was more fun to raid, mom's or dad's? My mother was a voracious reader, but she read more of the bestsellers or women's fiction or things I wasn't interested in at the time. My father, that was nasty, so we won't talk about that. I found my mother's boring and my father's nasty, so I had an unusual childhood. 8, how diverse is your library? Very diverse, and it was diverse even when I was younger, as I was struggling to belong to a group. And I remember a book that I read called Thursday's Child. It was written in 1956, but I think I read it in 62 or 63. And it was written by Eartha Kitt, and it was a very sad story and about her not belonging and the rough way she grew up, and she went through, I guess Thursday's Child is full of woe, and that's what it refers to. And I remember feeling quite a kinship with Eartha Kitt, believe it or not, even though we grew up in different circumstances. But that was one of the first diverse books I read, and I continued reading diverse books because I'm diverse. Number 9, what types of books do you find difficult to discuss? I don't find any books difficult to discuss. I'm up for any discussion. Obviously, I don't discuss books of genres that I'm not familiar with, like fantasy or most romance and sci-fi, most, not all. But I don't shy away from discussing any type of book, even books that I'm not that familiar with, because I want to learn. 10. In what way did your life experiences and emotions shape your choice of reading? They shaped my choice of reading in a big way. In the beginning, I read because I was an anxious child. So I turned to fairy tales to soothe myself. Then, when I was a little older, I was depressed as well as anxious, and I turned to mysteries to distract myself. And then when I got to the point of healing, that's when my reading changed into knowledge and spirituality and anything that was healing. So that's my answer to that question. 11. In much the same way as our taste for food changes, so perhaps does our taste in books. How would you say your own reading tastes have evolved over the decades? I think I read more literary fiction now. I read books that don't necessarily help me in any way, but are just enjoyable, or books that other booktubers have said are interesting in some way. So I think I'm branching out since I joined BookTube, which is over 6 months ago. 12. Unfortunately, we all feel down at certain times. Have you got a book to raise you back up? Do I? First, when I thought of this question, I thought of, well, Neil Simon's plays. He has like 4 volumes, and his kind of humor really brings me back to my childhood. I thought of All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot, and I thought of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Of all these books, I think I've only read one twice or more than once, and that's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. But then I thought of something else, and here's where my surprise comes in. I'm writing a memoir. This chapter might be taken out of the memoir, but it's about a book that meant a lot to me, and the whole chapter is about a book, and it's very short chapters, so don't worry. And I'll start now. I've always believed that books provided answers to most of life's dilemmas. This was never truer than when I was 22 and grappling with an unhappy marriage, a toddler, a newborn, my second son. The Thomas Cook European Rail Timetable was an international list of passenger rail schedules for every country in Europe. In a continuous publication from 1883 until August 2013, the word count during the 70s varied between 400 to 500 pages. This guide was not light reading. I carried the hefty book against my chest wherever I went, and it became known as Marilyn's Bible. I was determined to study the intricacies of the 24-hour clock and capitals of countries I never knew existed. This was insanity, or was it? Where you going, Marilyn? China or Timbuktu? No, man, China isn't in Europe. Sheesh, these Brooklynites gave me a headache. So unaware of the exciting world off our block. Marilyn, the weird librarian, a scrawny girl named Gina shouted at me. Get on a train for once. Go to Manhattan, I yelled back toward the wind. I was oblivious that they were making fun of me, that they were mocking me. I was too busy studying how to get from Frankfurt to Geneva next Monday at exactly 1300. I didn't really want to go to Geneva or not just to Geneva. My dream was set on the Pan American Airways around the world trip, priced at exactly $999. There were 2 routes, either traveling eastbound or west. My favorite itinerary went east from New York to Europe through Karachi. I love that name. To Japan and finally Honolulu, where I would decide whether to continue traveling on or lie on the beach forever. In a fever of expectation, I studied how to get a rail pass and use it to maximize each segment of my trip. I registered for classes at a community college in downtown Brooklyn just to obtain my international student identification card. The $5 a day books to Europe promised that this document was the key to traveling large on a minuscule budget. Rosa, a beauty from the projects, agreed to join me. At 20 and thrice married, she told me she was fake divorced. That means you're a bigamist, I said. But she didn't appear to care. We planned the details of our ball gown. Hers would be white, mine black. We named ourselves Sugar and Spice, pretended to be lost Spanish princesses who had somehow landed in Brooklyn. We envisioned dancing the night away with bullfighters and flamenco dancers. She enjoyed the fantasy of play acting, but I wasn't confident she intended to go. She was waiting for her personal injury lawsuit to be settled, while I frantically saved money by any legal means. She didn't have the discipline or obsession that drove one to a frenzy of planning and saving. I couldn't blame her. Yet, when she finally got the money and ran off to Puerto Rico with her sister without even telling me, I was devastated. My friend Carmen, who lived in Rosa's building, caught her sneaking into an illegal cab, where she convinced she was flying out to the island. I began to doubt if my life as wife and mother was real. I walked around in a daze, planning and daydreaming. I juggled my daily duties with forays to Manhattan, always searching for that life I knew I could have if I only found the right book. I spoke to my mirror like when I was 7 and communed with imaginary friends in the darkness of my abuela's television set. My mother had left to have a nervous breakdown, and I couldn't understand Spanish and later any other language. I learned that talking to fictional pals, one named Dave, soothed anxiety. Would it still work? Are we over the rainbow, Dorothy or I said? Despite being a stay-at-home mom with small children and a mostly absent husband, I had books, a vivid imagination, and my reflection in a full-length mirror. I later learned that I was in good company reading this weighty and detailed tome of Cook's. British novelist Malcolm Price listed the Thomas Cook European Timetable as one of his favorite travel-related reads, and that it would appeal to those who were nostalgic for the romance of rail travel. I don't know if Mr. Price had mental health issues, but that book saved me from a fate I considered worse than death, living an uninspired life. What clarity meant in my then unclear mind was that somehow I would board that train in Spain, rain or not, and be anywhere but here. In 1972, decent Latina wives didn't travel alone to faraway places without their husbands, but I knew that my survival depended on taking a heroine's quest. I would triumph, because in fairy tales, most of the time, princesses lived happily ever after. So that was my chapter on the Thomas Cook's Timetable, which was my answer to that question. And I hope that you liked this chapter of my book that might or might not get in, because my better readers are saying that it doesn't belong. But, well, you tell me. Let's get back to the questions. 13. If you have to choose one book or author to represent each decade of your life, who or what would they be? The books should be ones you read in that decade, not necessarily published in that decade. Like I said, I have a lot of decades to get through, but from 0 to 10, up to 10, I guess it was comics like Betty and Veronica. fairy tales. Then from 10 to maybe 15, which is not a decade, but I wanted to put Betty Smith, Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and a lot of the young adult kind of romantic books by Beverly Cleary, and there was another author called Rosamond Desjardins who wrote young adult books for girls at that time, and that's the way it used to be for girls or for boys. Then we get down to 15 to 20, where I wasn't reading as much. I was busy joining gangs, just kidding, getting married. One book that stood out was Childbirth Without Fear, which I read fearfully, by, I think his name was Bradley, but I'm not sure. I'll put a correction if that was wrong. Then in my 20s, I read Earl Stanley Gardner, Sherlock Holmes, and that's when I got really into mysteries, but not so much the deep mysteries, maybe the Agatha Christie lighter ones, and Perry Mason, which is Earl Stanley Gardner books. Then from 20 to 30, but this is also all was the $5 a day books by either Fodor or Fromer, Jane Austen, and a book I have here called Wishcraft by Barbara Sher, How to Get What You Really Want. This was like another Bible of mine, where there was a lot of quizzes on what is your best day in your life if you can have anything. And I loved this book. In fact, I loved Barbara Sher. And another book was, and I have 2 copies of this because I gave them to a lot of friends, Letting Go, a 12-week personal action program to overcome a broken heart by Zev Wanderer and Tracy Cabot. And this was very helpful in all my breakups, which were many. Let's see. From 40 to 50, it was more of the same thing. But after 50, I went to Japan, and I started reading more spiritual books like The Four Agreements by Don Luis Ruiz. And now, at just entering my 7th decade, I've been really branching out and reading a lot of suggested books that all these wonderful booktubers are giving me, and I'm having a ball. 15 or 14. Of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but how do you feel when people say reading is boring? And what would you say in defense of reading? Well, I kind of addressed that in the reading that I was doing. But when I moved to Hawaii, I was also considered weird for carrying around a notebook and books, because in my area of Hawaii, reading it's more of Hawaiians are more interested in oral history and songs and hula. So reading books wasn't very popular, and I was considered weird. And I guess I got used to being considered weird. When I came to Hawaii, another thing happened. It's not so much around books, but I wrote a lot of poetry. I started writing a lot of poetry. And also, I kind of lost my my heritage in a way, because there were the Puerto Ricans that lived here didn't speak Spanish, and they had a different culture. They were more local, and I couldn't find any Jewish people. So I sort of lost that part of myself, but that came back. So yeah, so that's my answer to that question. And number 15, what was the #1 selling book on the day of your most recent birthday, fiction or nonfiction? Have you read them? So I looked that up on the New York Times bestseller list, which was where the Cardinal came from in 1950. And it was Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owen. Did I read it? No. Will I read it? No. It's not my type of book. And from what people say about it, I don't think I'll ever read it. Okay, so who do you want to tag? I was thinking of just letting anybody tag who wants to do the tag, but I thought I would shout out some channels. with the tag. And one new booktuber that I've been reading is Robert from Barter Hordes, and his link will be down below in the description box. Barb and Isabella from The Font. And another new booktuber, his name is Pei, and his booktube channel is called Attention. And he's the nicest person, and he plays the guitar and writes songs, so check him out. Well, that was quite a lot of talking about myself, which I really don't like. No, I do. Or else I wouldn't be writing a memoir. I believe that people should write memoirs when they get older, because you tend to have a different outlook on your life when you're looking at it from a distance. And I think a lot of people write memoirs too young, and they're angry, or they can't really take the emotion out of it, and they're not written well because of that. I'm not saying that mine doesn't have emotion that's still there, because it does, but you have to know how to separate the emotional part of your life and be able to make fun of yourself a little bit, not be self-indulgent. So I hope that's what my book is going to do when it finally gets published or written or finished. If you like this channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. I just made 500 subscribers, and I'm very grateful. Unfortunately, I don't have the views that come along with those subscribers. Where are you, subscribers? Be that as it may, I appreciate everyone who is listening to me, and who thinks I might have something to say that's interesting or what. I can't believe that's true. But come back. Until the next time, aloha.